Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this stimulating forum, I expect. I see a number of faces in the room that reflect a tremendous amount of knowledge and engagement in our, community over many, many years, decades even. And so it's pretty exciting to have a conversation with all of you in this room. We are all Bioneers, and I think many people have participated in this weekend's Bioneer activities. So for those of you who are still sitting but wobbling after a full weekend of inspiration, excitement, and expansive thinking, this is going to be a chance to relax, but only to reflect in your relaxation. We have plenty planned for today. It's my privilege as the supervisor who participated to thank both Marin Link and the Environmental Forum of Marin for co-sponsoring this event with the Bioneers today. And the idea to bring us together to think and talk about what has been our fortune, our visioning in this county over time that has given us successful benefits, has put us in a leadership position in many aspects of community, environmentalism, and creativity. But also, where are we going? And how are we doing? What else do we need to focus on? And I've asked the panelists, each of whom brings their own wisdom, experience, and thoughts, to really acknowledge that we have this tremendous history, but also to focus their thoughts and their ideas on where we're going and where we need to be going, and what are some of the promising things and what are some of their concerns. So that's the focus of how we're going to spend our time today. As I mentioned, I wanted to say that Marin Link, for those of you who don't know Marin Link that well, it's really an organization that's created specifically to foster innovation, to work through a collaborative process, and to engage folks, the community as a whole, and those who are interested in similar types of activities. They're very effective in our community, and I want to thank them for being here. The Marin Environmental Forum is now in their 41st master class in Charging Forward. Yes, yeah. Promoting a sustainable world through education. And so the forum has really taken it upon itself over all these years through an outstanding volunteer effort to understand the power and the importance of education for people who do not know the history, for people who are new to the community, and for generations that need to follow after us. So I really appreciate the forum's participation in this. And of course, Bioneers, Kenny himself sat with a group of us about 6 months ago to talk about what would be a good way at the end of a long conference to bring and localize what we have here in our community and relate it to the aspirations that are laid out throughout this weekend in the Bioneers Conference. So I want to thank Kenny. I want to thank Mary O'Mara. I want to thank Sarah Kelly and Taylor from the Environmental Forum for working with me, Joshua Fouts and Lisa Cross and Kelly Barr for supporting us all the way as we went to make this afternoon a possibility. I think, and I often say this, and I think that probably wouldn't be a surprise if many people who are fortunate to be in this room, who live in our community in Marin County, would say that we are on a regular basis stopping for a moment and expressing deep gratitude for this blessing of being able to live here. It's a remarkable place, and we should all be deeply moved by the opportunities, many of which have grown out of this passionate sense of place that has existed for over 100 years. And I think that we're building on that in our conversation about where we want to go forward. But it's that sense of place that stirs our passion that really is the essence of why we have the potential to continue to be in a leadership position and a strong community. I was thinking back 100 years ago is really, because I'm trying to encourage us to sort of think out in 50-year increments. 100 years ago, approximately, William Kent did a remarkable thing when he bought one of the last virgin stands of redwoods and preserved what we now know as Muir Woods. Now, 100 years later, we've got one heck of a challenge associated with it, but that act of generosity, that act of conservation activism, that sense of priority that he placed on the land over the burgeoning community really set the tone for the last 100 years. And I think over and over again, we'll hear stories and know stories about how that has become part of our culture. 100 years ago, too, the Marin Municipal Water District was formed. It was the first public water district, and it was really a battle over should water be a private utility or a public utility. And the people of Marin County, including William Kent, who had shares in the private water company, set a future for us that was a public water supply. And subsequently, those 10,000 acres have grown to 20,000 acres, and a stewardship and a recreation mission as well as a water supply mission. And they've been very fundamental in helping us to maintain a slow level of growth. So again, the vision 100 years ago still has an imprint on where we are today. One that's less complete in my mind is that 50 years ago, this community was just celebrating the opening of Marin City. Marin City was designed by nationally renowned architects. It won planning awards. It was a model community in the eyes of everyone who participated. And it was a chance to step up as Marin County. Marin County became the first redevelopment agency in the state of California to invest in Marin City. And so Marin City was born with great promise and a sense of responsibility for those African Americans who had been left behind after the war and had no other opportunities to move into other communities that so many of the white co-workers who lived with them in Marin City were able to do. So Marin County stepped forward and created a redevelopment agency, committed to purchasing it from the federal government, got the bonds approved by the community, and built at that time what they thought was the solution for a fair, safe, healthy community. We know we're not done today. So some of what I talk about in terms of visioning doesn't always lead to the outcomes we want, and we need to refocus ourselves when we do. Lastly, I just want to say that really the hallmark of planning in our county is our countywide plan. And that was a process that took 5 years. In many respects, it reflects some of the things that I think the Bioneers teach us, and that is that we as a community, as individuals, working collaboratively, speaking our voice, are the ones responsible for change. And it was the freeway revolt of the 1960s that created the powerful community plan that we have today, the countywide plan. It stopped freeways that would have run across the ridges all the way through West Marin. It wasn't as photographic as stopping the freeway in midair in the Embarcadero, but it was far more impacting in terms of the change in our land use. And the countywide plan, adopted after 5 years, in concert with all the cities and towns who were part of a council that worked on that plan, created a document that, although it's powerful and political, is not legal. It left the responsibility to individual cities to take the local land use issues needed to fulfill the plan. And the plan was really strong. In fact, I think, today we talk so freely about sustainability. The plan had 3 basic goals, and they are the basic goals of sustainability. Discourage rapid or disruptive growth, but encourage social and economic diversity within our communities. That was the first goal. That recognized the importance of the whole. Just like the Bioneers talk about the whole, holistic thinking, all aspects are interrelated. We as a community have all aspects of our community interrelated. The second goal was achieve greater economic balance for Marin by increasing the number of jobs and housing for people who hold them. So there was this idea that we should strive for a jobs housing balance, and where have things gone? And then finally, to achieve high quality in the natural and built environments through balanced systems of transportation, land use, and open space. And the plan did really reflect the citizen participation that had gone on. So I think that what we know is that we have benefited from planning. We have challenges as a result of our planning and forces that are much larger than us at a regional, national, and even global scale. The panelists we have that I'm going to provide the opportunity now to speak are each completely versed in all aspects of our community. They may speak to a particular aspect of sustainability in the limited time they have to stir your imaginations, but they're prepared to talk, I'm sure, about any aspect of what we need to go forward as a healthy community that benefits each of us. I'm going to start by asking Nona from the Marin Conservation League. Nona has been involved in the environmental movement for a long time, And she also brings her science-based background to the thinking she does, which is ideally suited to a Bioneers conference. So welcome, Nona Dennis, please.
I think I'm last.
I see lots and lots of friends out there. Thanks for coming. I have a different hat on today, Steve. I am wearing my Environmental Forum hat. You can tell the difference.
Oh, yeah.
It's whiter or something. I don't know. Anyway, so I am really thrilled to represent the Environmental Forum, but I have to, as a caveat, have to explain that I am not speaking for the Environmental Forum. It's an honor to represent them. I was not a founder. I was there at the right time and the right place. The really cutting-edge idea came from Marty Griffin. Marty Griffin of Save Our Coast. And to him, we owe a real debt of gratitude for having the brilliant idea that an informed citizenry is an effective citizenry. That is the premise on which the Environmental Forum is founded. The idea is get 3 votes out of 5 in practical terms, and at that time, it was pretty significant. So we've been asked in this panel to acknowledge the leaders who asked, can the last place last, and created this bold vision, which Steve has outlined as the 73 plan, which was really a whole new set of ideas. And then it refers to this as resulting in 80% of the land of Marin being saved. And then, of course, we're supposed to turn our attention to this bold new vision. Not that simple. First, I want to look at what is 85% of Marin County. I'll probably focus on the 85%. Roughly 50% public lands, federal, state, county, local, water district. 50% almost of Marin County is publicly owned. And that's a result, as Steve said, of 100 years of putting the blocks and the pieces together. 36% is agricultural land protected basically by A60 zoning, and Jamison is going to be talking about that. So it leaves us with 15%, which is us in our active day-to-day lives in our communities, and pretty much in the eastern corridor of Marin County. So these are what are called in the little brochure, the outline introduction to this panel, our conservation legacy. And I say, yes, it's a legacy, but it's more than that. It's a baseline. It's a baseline for looking forward. Any vision, in my view, has to start with that as a baseline. And what about the 15%? Our towns, our communities, and so forth. Pretty much defined by geography. Our towns are nestled against the hills on one side and up against the coast on the other side. Not a lot of wiggle room, but that's going to be probably the critical area that we look at in terms of how much can you wiggle. We'll get to that in a moment. So I'm going to look backward for a moment because I can't drive without looking in a rearview mirror. They say we shouldn't do that, but it gives me context, and then it allows me to look forward and build on that context. So looking backward, many of you have read this, and it sort of reads like War and Peace. You know, the good guys, the bad guys, long, long list of characters, but it really sets the stage. And probably all of you by this time have seen Rebels with a Cause. But in between are the stories that often are not told, and those are the thousands and thousands of extraordinary things that have been done by ordinary people. From the 500,000 who saved our seashore in the late 60s to the 5,000 that saved Fort Hill in Mill Valley in the late 80s. But I want to go to the 60s as being pivotal because that's 50 years ago from now. The 60s was pivotal in the kind of the jockeying back and forth of extraordinary growth and restraint at the same time. The growth, the we′re plan, the plan earlier in the 50s actually to fill Richardson Bay, to fill Bolinas Lagoon. These were all things that were happening in the 60s. And along came Peter Bear in 62 and began to tilt the balance, but against the odds at that point. By 68, the other Pete had come in, Peter Aragoni. And then the scales shifted to an environmental majority. And following that, we had the ability to kill the West Marin plan, to put in A60 zoning, and actually it was Pete Aragoni, sorry, Gary. Gary came along in 72, but Pete Aragoni was the one who was the swing vote to get A60 zoning over all the agricultural lands in Marin County. So the 60s, and out of that came the visionary 1973 plan, of course. But still, at the end of the 60s, the projected population for Marin was close to 400,000. So we must have done something right since that time, right? We are only at 55,000 now. Some kind of judicious restraint, I'd call it. My vision now is really calling for what we did then and how we move beyond from that. But I look at that, when I look at that decade, I really look to Peter Bear, and I guess I would say now, what would Peter Bear do? Because he was the unusual kind of person who could be an idealist and a pragmatist at the same time and never let pragmatism get in the way of idealism. So my vision, 6 points. First of all, the 85% dominates, and that creates, for me, kind of the basic map. The 85% is the baseline. So many reasons to save that, to steward the 85%, if only for the sake of my new great-grandson who was born Wednesday. Mm-hmm. Not the first. So, no, you don't need to do the math. Anyway, so then second, the 73 plan, the corridors that were established, they still work with the addition of the fourth corridor that we put in with the 2007 plan. Remember, however, that this 73 plan was for the entire county. We don't do that now. We have 11 other jurisdictions who all have their plans and they don't all agree. And this is, of course, one of our main challenges. So the third point, the 2007 plan is what I call a preliminary instruction manual for sustainability. And it worked for 2007 and we're building on that. So we're doing really important things, although my model for sustainability is not an equilateral triangle or equal Venn diagrams, but rather an ellipse, which is the environment, within it, society, and within that, the economy. We have, in many respects, turned that inside out and let the economy drive the environment. This is not my view of sustainability. So we're working on sustainability, making great progress, but there's a huge disconnect still in my mind between our claims to sustainability and how we actually live, with the biggest ecological footprint literally in the world. Affluence begets consumption, and we import our goods, and we leave behind our footprints and our emissions. The fifth, what about those remaining percentage points? The 15%, probably 12, 13 already developed. How much room do we have there? We have some. For more housing, for infill housing, for preferably affordable housing. But until we invest seriously in intra and inter-transit, we will have limits on what we can do. SMART is not going to resolve Highway 37. It's not going to resolve the Richmond Bay Bridge. It's not going to resolve Sir Francis Drake. It's not going to resolve Tiburon Boulevard, or even East Blithedale, which is my problem. And bike lanes won't work for me and other octogenarians. So finally, my old and kind of bold idea here is it's called collaborative planning. Collaborative kind of, what a simple idea. We're doing it. In many respects, we're doing it. But it's imperative to bring together the 12 jurisdictions we have and the many service districts that we have so that we begin to think of housing, cumulative jobs, transportation, and finally, sea level rise in a coordinated fashion. This is not a bold, new vision. It's like taking an idea, taking the good things we've done, and moving forward and making them better. Evolution is basically a conservative process in which the bad ideas don't last. The good ideas are retained. And I guess that is my view of the vision. I'd like to go back to the 60s and say, Peter Bear, what would you do now?
Thank you, Nona. Next, we have Dana King, who many of you may know as a television journalist. Others of you in the room may know her as the chair of the Marin Kids, which is an emerging advocacy effort that's gone on for the last half dozen years in our county to bring opportunities for our youngest children to be fully engaged in our community, fully ready for school and healthy. I want to invite Dana up here. I want to also acknowledge that we especially appreciate you being here today because Dana is running for a city council position in the city of Oakland where she currently is living. And so if you hear her mention Oakland a few times, send your good wishes her. Dana King.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's true. I'm in Oakland now, and I lived here in Marin almost 17 years, and my children grew up here, went to school here, and you know, Steve started our conversation today with a word that touched me at my heart, grateful. And I am so grateful. When I drove across the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, and I saw the hilltops and the green, and I know the effort that's been made to secure land into the future of Nona's great-grandchildren and beyond. Great and beyond. Come on now. That's a beautiful thing. It's an amazing thing that's been done here in Marin. So I'm a little conflicted as I come to talk to you today about what I think sustainability is to me. Sustainability to me is obviously about land and our natural resources, but it's also about the equity that surrounds it. And it isn't just one thing. So sustainability for me is around equity in education, around equity in access via transportation, via healthy food. It's also equity around housing. Marin is a wealthy community, and yet there are pockets of invisible need. And one of the things that Marin Kids really wanted to bring forward was the disparity in education. Most of our kids are doing really well. And so actually I want to talk to you through the lens of the children of the community, because we're leaving this for them. But it starts with education. So as long as we have inequity in education, and if you look at the numbers, those invisible communities of brown and black children here in Marin, they're not doing so well. Their math scores, their English scores, their science scores are really profoundly abysmal. There's a massive difference between the learning that goes on for children of color and the absorption rate of education for our children of color. And so the answer that Marin Kids has defined as a way to close that inequity is through pre-K. Pre-K for every child. And it starts with the youngest ones, because a child who starts in pre-K is 18 months ahead of a child who doesn't. And it's really that simple, and it's really that profound. And if we can start there, then the need for reading at grade level 3 and graduation rates and everything else we worry about will start to fix itself. So that's a sustainability in education that I would like to see moving forward for not just Marin children, but for all children. Sustainability around healthy food. We all know, and we all attempt to eat as healthy a diet as we possibly can. We have amazing farms here in Marin, organic farms. Every store you go into, just a plethora of delicious, healthy food. But it's food for the majority. It's not food for the minority, because that kind of quality of food is expensive. Most young kids who live in poverty don't eat very well. And I don't mean the amount of food they eat. I mean the quality of food that they eat. You know, we're fighting to have GMO labeling on all of our food packaging. Children in poverty don't have that luxury to define whether they should have the corn chips that we all know are grown with GMO, or they can have something healthy and organic. The option is not available. So I'd like us to look at that, and as we move forward, work on bringing down the cost. I don't know how to do that. Land is expensive here. Water is expensive here. Food production is expensive here. We have to find ways, though, to bring equity in our diets for all Marin people, all children here in the county. Transportation. 60% of the people who come to Marin drive here because they can't live here because it's too expensive. Over in Oakland, we're working on bikeable and walkable areas. We're an urban environment. This is a suburban environment. So it's not necessarily a one-for-one apples and apples kind of comparison, but it's a consideration. We're working on bus rapid transit in Oakland. We have mass transit. Urban areas reduce your footprint just because you can live together. We don't live together as closely here. But there also isn't an opportunity to use mass transit to the benefit that we see in other communities. So I would encourage Marin to really invest as we move forward in mass transit. When I pulled in here, there are a lot of cars in the parking lot. I drove here by myself. I stand before you. I raise my hand. I'm guilty of coming all by myself to this event in my vehicle. It's an opportunity. This event is an opportunity for us to really think about how we move through the world. We know what we should be doing, but do we do it? And thirdly, I'd like to encourage a conversation around sustainability in housing. We've had many conversations in this county about affordable housing. And for those children, the next generation and the next generation, will they be able to afford what we've afforded here? I don't know. I don't know. Jobs aren't the same. The fact that I worked 25 years in an industry and I worked for 3 different companies in those 25 years, that just is not the way we do it anymore. So will our children be able to afford the housing that we have here? No, I don't think so. Affordable housing, workforce housing. We want our firefighters and our teachers to live amongst us. So we have to look at a future of workforce and affordable housing. Affordable housing is not public housing. There's a massive difference. And I think that that's been lost in translation. At least those are the conversations that I've had, the misunderstandings around affordable housing. It's not public housing. People who need affordable housing are the working, hardworking, poor. And poor today is not the same as poor 50 years ago. It's different. So I'm a little conflicted about this conversation that I'm having with you because you know what? I'm grateful because I have benefited from the abundance that exists in this county. My children have benefited, and that's why we moved here. But it's also why I moved to Oakland, because I wanted to live in an urban environment. I wanted to live where my footprint was smaller. And it's automatically smaller in an urban environment. So the question I have is, how can we reduce our footprint in a suburban environment, in a wealthy community? And how can we spread our wealth and our values around to the benefit of all? The Maasai warriors have a saying when they greet another warrior. And they ask them first, Kasirian and Gira, and how are the children doing? And if the answer is, and the children are fine, then that means they have shelter, they have food, they have water, they have peace, they have happiness. So I ask you, how are all of our children doing? Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I would just add a couple thoughts that the demographics of our community are changing dramatically, have over these last 50 years, and will continue to change dramatically, as will that of California. And those are going to be formidable forces as we think about the future. By the year 2050, almost half of the workforce will be Hispanic, Latino, or indigenous people. In the 1970 census, Hispanic, Latino did not even show up on the racial mix of Marin County. So big changes in California are expressed here. Baby boomers are aging. Our senior population is making us one of the oldest counties in California. Large forces at work for us to think about as we go forward. We're going to think about it in terms of the 1973 plan that made a deep commitment that's been followed to this day to support our agriculture. And one of the fundamental ways in which we've been able to do it is through our Marin Agricultural Land Trust, first in the nation of agricultural land trust, well guided today and led by Jamison Watts. Jamison?
Thank you, Steve. I just would like to thank Marin Link and the Environmental Forum of Marin and the County of Marin for sponsoring this panel discussion. I also want to thank Joshua and Bioneers for putting on another great conference. And I want to thank all of you for coming tonight, late on a Sunday. I'd like to start with a definition of sustainable agriculture by the USDA, and forgive me for reading. A system capable of maintaining its productivity and usefulness to society indefinitely. Such systems must be resource conserving, they're talking about soil and water primarily, socially supportive, commercially competitive, and environmentally sound. And while this is an older definition of sustainable agriculture, I think it still serves us today. For me, agricultural sustainability really comes down to three key ingredients. And those are land that is ecologically healthy and agriculturally productive, available long-term for agricultural use, and affordable relative to the market. Capital is another thing that is absolutely critical to sustainable agriculture. Capital to start a business, any business, not just an agricultural business, but also capital periodically later on to jumpstart that business or refresh that business. And also income are also very important. And thirdly, people. Agricultural producers, the farmers and ranchers that work tirelessly to produce the food that we eat and other agricultural products, and then the consumers that buy those goods, buy those products, and create the markets by which agriculture can persist. So those are really, for me, three primary ingredients to sustainable agriculture. And so what does MALT, or the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, have to do with those three things? And the answer is everything. So there's been a great historical context given regarding the 1973 plan and agriculture and the protection of agriculture with primarily the zoning ordinance. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of the history and the origins of MALT, but I will say that in the 34 years that MALT has existed, we have worked with 73 families and protected nearly half of all the privately owned farmland in the county. Through an investment of nearly $60 million in 34 years. About half that money came from our supporters, has come and continues to come from our supporters, and about half comes from public agencies and family foundations. This is critical, and this money is in the form of easement payments that serves as capital for these families. And they use this money to solidify ownership. They use it to buy out siblings to solidify ownership, to pay off inheritance taxes to stay on the land, and to capitalize the business. There's a couple examples. Strauss, the easement payment that MALT gave them for their easement allowed them to become the first organic dairy west of the Mississippi, the first organic creamery in the nation. And they are a leader now today worldwide in organic dairying. There's other examples, but this capital is critical. It's a critical piece of the puzzle, and that's something that MALT has provided for 34 years and will continue to contribute. So in the limited time I have, I want to talk about three challenges and opportunities that face agricultural conservation, land conservation in Marin County. The first is escalating land values. Because, in large part, because 80% or 85% of the land in Marin is protected, the remaining land has a higher demand. And the very thing that we love about Marin, this iconic landscape, attracts a very serious threat, and that is non-agricultural buyers who are eager and capable of buying farms and ranchers for private estates and luxury homes. What this does is there's two major results of this. One is these farms are taken out of agricultural production. A working agricultural unit is taken offline. And in a small county like Marin, every single farm and ranch is critical to be in a working state to contribute to the critical mass of Marin's agricultural economy, which consists of the producers, the landowners, and the supporting infrastructure that makes it all possible. So these ranches and farms get taken offline. A second result of that is land values continue to escalate far beyond the true agricultural value of that property. So the farming families that continue to own agricultural land in Marin face a harder and harder challenge, more and more difficult challenge in passing that land on to their heirs because of estate taxes. So these are two big things that are happening that we see as a major threat. So MALT took it upon ourselves to be proactive about this and creating what's called, or adding a new provision to our easements called mandatory agricultural use that requires commercial agriculture. We are one of the first land trusts in the country to do so, and basically the bottom line is that if the landowner cannot or will not keep that property in agricultural use, MALT has the ability to find a leasee or an operator to keep that land in agricultural use. So this does two things. This directly remedies the two things I described. It controls, theoretically, the escalation in land values by really mandating continued agricultural use, and it keeps those lands in agricultural production, whether it be by the landowner or a lessee or operator that they find or that we find. That's very critical. Another challenge that we're experiencing right now is climate change. 2013 was the driest year in California on record. And Steve can tell you, and others in the room, I'm sure, can tell you that it's been painful for many operators and landowners, agriculturalists in Marin County. Through the work that MALT has done with the Marin Carbon Project, we have found that carbon beneficial ranching practices can increase carbon sequestration rates and removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And not just a little bit. So our research, our findings suggest that applying compost of just 5% of California's rangeland will sequester 28 million metric tons of carbon a year for 20 to 30 years. It's not just a one-time deal. That's the equivalent of removing 6 million cars from the road. So this is a big deal. It's something really big that we're working on. There's two things to this. One is adding carbon to the soil increases the soil's ability to retain water, making these ranches more drought resilient. So the more water these ranches' soils are able to retain, the longer the grasses will grow, and the more rigorously the grasses will grow. So you have a higher quality forage lasting longer. Secondly, I'm sure most of you in the room are familiar with the cap and trade market that's been established in California under AB 32. That market is surviving and beginning to grow. And the Marin Carbon Project submitted this protocol, this rangeland protocol, not to the Air Resources Board, but to another organization that reviews protocols. It's been recently adopted. It is now going to, or approved, I should say, it's now going to the Air Resources Board for approval. And it's not a matter of if this protocol will be adopted, it's a matter of when. We're talking a couple of years before ranchers will be able to receive payments for incorporating carbon beneficial ranching practices on their ranches. Yeah. And so this is the future. This is the future of ranching, not only in the Bay Area, but statewide and potentially globally. This is a solution to a possible solution or part of the solution to climate change. It also is part of the solution for drought resilience. Finally, and Steve, just give me the crook.
Yeah, this is fun.
Finally is farm succession. And this was the same threat 50 years ago that is or 35 years ago that is here with us today. How do we keep farms in the family in agricultural production? So nationally, there are approximately 2 million family farms in America. Approximately 30% of those will pass to a second generation, but less than 10 will pass to a third. You couple that with the average age of agriculturalists in America today is 65, and it's similar to Marin. Marin's about 60. You put those two things together, you can see the writing on the wall. Even with all the work that we've done, all the capital we've invested, we are still at risk if we cannot keep these folks profitable on the land and employed by the land. And so the first two things I mentioned really play directly into that. Land permanence through easements, capital, environmental stewardship, and training and development. So we're all working on those things. So just in closing, you know, the world is going to have to feed 9 billion people in the next 25 years. That's astounding. And so I'm not suggesting that the Marin Agricultural Land Trust is going to, and our farmers and ranchers are going to feed 9 billion people, but the consensus out there is that we can't enlarge our agricultural footprint anymore. We have to be more productive and more sustainable using the land we have. And Marin Agricultural Land Trust and our partner, the County of Marin, and a whole bunch of other partners that we work with, we have, in my opinion, one of the closest things to a sustainable agricultural community in the nation. We are the first agricultural land trust in the nation. I think we have one of the closest things to a truly sustainable agricultural community in the nation. That is a model for the rest of the world. And so I look forward to working with my fellow panelists and all of you to see what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamison. You know, that really brings home the power of the vision, because that was a conscious decision that was made about 40 years ago to go down this path. And since everyone bought into it at that time. We've been able to create governmental alignment, nonprofits, community support, tremendous philanthropy. And last year, voters in Marin County, by an overwhelming majority, put our own dollars in through a sales tax measure that supports MALT on an annual basis for the next 9 years. So we are continuing to be committed to agriculture. A couple other things to think about in terms of the longer range is that we are a county that beat all other state efforts to allow for GMOs. We have no GMOs allowed by law in our county, and none of our ranchers and farmers are going there. Thank you. We also, 20 years ago, said we wanted to be a diverse community. We wanted to move from the commodities of beef and dairy exclusively, and we've done a remarkable job of that as well. Thousands and thousands more acres in organic row crops. 75% of our dairies are organically certified today, and our Ag Commissioner was the first in the state to become eligible to certify for organic and has provided a very useful service. So agriculture has a big, strong place in our community. Within our community, also a big, strong place is held by Congressman Huffman, who's taken time also out of his campaign, where he not only is running for re-election, but helping to move an entire nation towards saner, more holistic thinking. Jared has been there from his days on the Water Board to his days representing us in our state legislature, now to being a voice in a much larger conversation that's happening nationally. And it reminds me that no matter what our vision is, we can't live without the understanding that we live within a region, a nation, and a globe. Jared Huffman.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, Bioneers. I am very honored to represent you in the United States Congress, and you may know now that Marin County, as much as we like to think ourselves a wonderful island, is actually connected with 6 other counties stretching up to the Oregon border in the most beautiful congressional district in America, the 2nd District. You know, the last time this congressional district was configured like that, the entire North Coast, a third of the California coast, was back in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and we were representatives before I was born, let alone before I was a resident of Marin County. But we were represented by a young congressman by the name of Clem Miller at that time. And it's interesting for me to reflect. I know we're looking forward, but got to do a little bit of that rear view stuff that Nona talked about. And it's interesting to me that I now occupy the seat held by someone who did some really tremendously important things in his short time. 52 years ago, this fall, he was killed in a plane crash near Eureka. But in his short, almost 4 years in Congress, one of the big things he did for Marin County was he authored the legislation that created the Point Reyes National Seashore, which is a big, big deal. He did some other important things around the district, helped create the King Range Conservation Area further north and many other things. But that's just a wonderfully important thing for Marin County. And you know, that legacy of land conservation and ocean conservation, these are things that we've really done well here in Marin County. It's continued in my congressional district right up to my predecessor, Lynn Woolsey, who worked until her final days in Congress, her 20-year career, to fight for the expansion of the Gulf of the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. We're going to get that done very soon, months, not years. And it's going to be a big tribute to her incredible work. But I reflect on the work of those 2 predecessors in this important area of land and water and ocean conservation because I think to at least, well, 2 reasons. One, environmental victories are never final. You know, you may think you got a big environmental victory and you celebrate it, but they're always challenged, no matter what they are. And believe me, I can tell you this from firsthand experience in the last 2 years in the House of Representatives. I've been defending the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act, and even the Antiquities Act of 1906 has been under the gun. Everything has been in the crosshairs. And all of the environmental victories that we celebrate here in Marin, as much as we like to think of them as history, are going to continue to be things we'll need to fight and defend. There's nothing we can do that makes them permanent. Even the wonderful work of Jamison and his conservation easements and trust work, there may be future legal attempts to erode those. And there may be policies that are enacted in Sacramento or in Washington that threaten that entire model. So the victories we've won are huge, they're important, we got to keep re-winning many of them. The second reason I think it's relevant to reflect on those things in my congressional district's history is because when it comes to this big challenge we now face, and I think we have to look at the future largely through the lens of climate change. I think the past is prologue in some ways. I had an event a few months ago out at the Bodega Marine Lab on the issue of ocean acidification, one of the most sobering aspects of climate change. And we talked with lots of leading scientists on this subject, and they spoke about how important that Gulf of the Farallones expansion is for climate adaptation and ocean acidification, because our marine ecosystems are going to become very fragile. And a lot of this acidification is kind of baked in. It's going to be happening, you know, even if we take some dramatic action to address emissions. So with ecosystems on the edge and in such perilous condition, it's critically important that we provide safe places where the stressors are reduced if we're going to hang on to biodiversity and to the kind of environmental values that we care about. Climate change really is, I think, the number one thing we've got to think about as we consider the future of environmental leadership and sustainability in Marin County. And I see some exciting, very new and different possibilities for our community in the years ahead. A lot of exciting work's already happened. Marin Clean Energy certainly is going to be a huge part of our response to climate change because energy is such a huge part of the problem. But I see a couple of other areas, two specific areas where I think we have an opportunity to do much more and to show really important leadership. The first is we've got to get much better on the environmental footprint of how we move around, our transportation. And we have an opportunity to do that in a couple of critical ways. The SMART project, while not a silver bullet, certainly nobody should think that, but I think it's going to be really important to take thousands and thousands of cars off the road and to provide an alternative that can mesh with bicycle and pedestrian and shuttles and so many other things. And this may not be an issue here in Marin where we're not going to do a lot more developing, but believe me, further north in the areas I represent in Sonoma County, SMART is going to give us opportunities for the remaining growth there to happen in a much more environmentally responsible way. It's really, really important for that purpose. And so I'm excited about that part of our transportation environmental footprint getting much better with the advent of SMART. Of course, pedestrian and cycling transportation has an opportunity to grow much more here in Marin too. We're already national leaders. I see Andy Perry back there nodding and glowing because I'm giving you a shout out. You deserve it. You've helped put Marin County on the map, and we have an opportunity to demonstrate to the rest of the world that you just don't need to drive everywhere you go. It's healthier, it's cleaner, it's better for the planet, better for our quality of life, and we have attracted some federal dollars. I'll try to build on that legacy as well, Andy, and keep working on it when we can find some federal dollars. But there's even more than that. There's EV charging stations. Marin is as good or better than any place I've ever been in terms of beginning to have EV charging stations so that folks can, again, demonstrate here to the rest of the country, the rest of the world, that if you do have to drive, you don't always have to drive cars that burn gasoline. I just got a new Ford C-Max hybrid. I'm going to brag a little bit. 21 miles on electric-only mode, and like so many Marin people, we just do a lot of driving around this community. And it's exciting when I end a day and realize I haven't burned any gasoline. So by building out the charging infrastructure, we're going to make it possible for lots of us to do that a lot of the time. So transportation, that's one piece. The other one I want to put out there builds on what Jamison brought up about the new possibilities that we're beginning to understand with rangeland management and with other agricultural policies. We cannot allow our food supply to be something that only comes from huge concentrated industrial operations in the places like the Central Valley. We can't let our beef only come from CAFOs like Harris Ranch, and we can't let mega dairies be the only place that we get our milk and cheese. We have to demonstrate that you can have local, sustainably grown, sustainably sourced food right here in our community. And we're doing that more and more here. I think that's an exciting way that we will lead on sustainability going forward. But the work of the Marin Carbon Project and John Wick, who I don't think is here, but he's on the front page of today's San Francisco Chronicle. And you might want to get that if you're not familiar with his work, is truly exciting. Something we've always thought was an environmental impact inherently, right? Ranching. John Wick is beginning to show that if it's done right, if it's done carefully, with careful vegetation management, with careful rotational grazing, with a little bit of leavening, with some compost perhaps, the numbers are unbelievable. And this is not wishful thinking. He's doing this with real scientific rigor, involving folks at Stanford and other leaders in their field, and he's beginning to produce results that among other things, have gotten him recently accredited with the American Carbon Registry as a carbon offset source. So I will tell you, one of the most productive things I've done in Congress so far was a hearing in our Public Lands Subcommittee in the Natural Resources Committee, where normally we fight. And the chairman is a guy named Rob Bishop from Utah. He does not like government. He does not like regulation. He laughs at the concept of human-caused climate change. And yet we had this hearing where witnesses, I brought John Wick as a witness, and he testified about the work that he's doing and the numbers that he's beginning to show. And lo and behold, there were ranchers from Utah and from Arizona that were coming up with similar results and engaging in similar best management practices. And the theme of this hearing suddenly became very hopeful and collaborative, and the possibilities of actually hanging on to agriculture and making it something that helps us solve climate change became kind of contagious. And Rob Bishop, who I often fight with, actually said he might want to work with me on this. So it's pretty exciting. And I was with some folks at a different event on climate change just a few nights ago. I was talking to a guy who was involved in some of the biggest solar installations in California in the last few years. And he's done amazing things, but he was sort of confiding to me that he was nevertheless a little bit overwhelmed because he'd done the math. And as great as solar's going right now, as exciting as it is, as good as the trends look, it's not going to be online fast enough to hold us to 2 degrees temperature rise the way we have to do. And he was a little despondent about it. And I reminded him that it's not just going to be solar panels, okay? I mean, he can't do it all with solar panels. Solar panels are great. They're going to be an important part of this. But there's going to be some real game changers across the range of environmental policies and agricultural policies. This work by the Marin Carbon Project is potentially one of them. So I hope that's something that we'll all support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jared, and thanks to each of the panelists for sharing those thoughts. And now it's an opportunity to have a discussion. I'm a little bit uncertain how we're going to handle it, but I think, are we going to have a microphone moving around so folks will be able to ask questions, and we'll get to you. Please be brief. I think as I say, we want to reach for where we're going, but I think as Jared and others have pointed out, it's built on a tremendous tradition in this county, so we certainly understand wanting to speak to that. So I'll call on the first speaker here, and then the next one will be right in front of him there. Thank you. Please.
Hi,
And
thank you
identify
very much.
yourself if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, my name is Demetrius. I've been living in Marin County for about 15 years. And, we all hear about solar panels and other things like that, but there's a lot of other technologies that are available currently that can actually solve all these problems that we've been talking about today. One of them is ethanol production. And unfortunately, every bad thing you've heard about ethanol is a bunch of crap from the oil industries. And ethanol can take out 4 times as much carbon out of the atmosphere than it puts out. There's a process where you can take farm waste and make methane out of it, and then take the waste from that and make ethanol, and then take the waste from that and produce fish, and then take the waste from that and produce food through aquaculture. And John Parr down in Watsonville is producing 10,000 heads of lettuce inside a 1-acre greenhouse per month, using 95% less water than traditional farming methods. And I guess to frame it in a question, before I guess I feel frustrated sometimes because I know of all these different technologies, roof water catchment, all these things, but unfortunately it seems like there's, you know, a lot of PR for certain technologies, especially solar, which is great, and we heard today that California gets 20% of its energy from solar, which is great because the city of LA uses 20% of California's electricity just to pump water for LA. But using water catchment, aquaculture, all these, I would just love to see you guys explore these different options and not just, you know, going with what is being put across by, you know, bigger corporations. And,
Thank you.
Okay. Anyways.
And yeah, I encourage folks, you don't all have to ask questions. You can share a thought and then share it with another. So we're moving it up to the gentleman there, and then someone in the near vicinity there, and we'll work our way around. Oh, there's a mic over here. We'll come over here next then. Thanks.
I'm Al Dugan from Novato, California. And you mentioned that the county plan, basically, the goal is to grow jobs and housing. And it seems like all the press is always dealing with the housing, about growth and high density along 101. Can you explain the top 3 things that the county plan presents to help increase jobs in the county? Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll give panelists an opportunity to think about it. What I mentioned there, Al, was that in 1973, that was a goal of the countywide plan identified through the community building process that led to it. In Marin County, in terms of our efforts to build jobs, it begins with getting children their basic needs, getting them into early preschool activities, moving them through an education system, remembering that over half of our workforce in not too many decades from now will be the same people that are struggling today for an education. It's programs like we have at Indian Valley College to work with those who are not degree-oriented in college but are skill-oriented, and working with our Workforce Investment Board to identify what our employers need in this area in the way of skills, and then providing those skills through programs like that. For those who are never going to be college-bound, it's taking at-risk youth through our North Bay Conservation Corps and other programs like that, and giving them skills so that they can still be self-sufficient and contributing in the community. It's in our realignment programs, in our social justice programs, built into our civil court system, so that instead of putting people away, we're actually giving them the skills that they need to stay and be active in the community. So I think that today we have a number of ways that we're attempting to build our economy. There are many who think that what we've done, because of the high rising land costs, is we've got jobs that are not economically sufficient for the people, forcing them to drive many, many miles. So there's a balancing that we need to look at in our community about what kind of jobs and where are those jobs and where do the people come to those jobs. I think those are some of the really important questions we answer going forward. Nona.
Yeah, just one brief response, and that is, we didn't say earlier that the 1973 plan not only really established the conservation areas of Marin County, but also encouraged job growth. That was in 1973. In some respects, it did its job too well, and the growth then of jobs grew at, of course, extremely fast, much faster rate than housing or population actually grew. So filling the jobs meant people coming into the county from outside. So from a bedroom community, now Marin County has become a kind of a job center, continues to be a bedroom because we export people out for jobs elsewhere at the same rate that we bring them in to fill jobs here. So we have some problems.
Thank you. To the back.
Sure. That's a perfect segue to my question, which is about affordable housing. I've lived in Marin County for 20 years and run a nonprofit and make a decent wage. but I can barely afford to live here. And so, talk about bringing in jobs. Where are people going to live? They have to live in other communities. And one thing, years ago, I was part of a co-housing group, and we really explored the possibility of doing co-housing, intergenerational co-housing in Marin County. And we just pretty much knocked our heads against the wall. And I think that that's that kind of thinking of intergenerational, co-housing, community gardens. I just don't see Marin embracing that. It's impossible to have a community garden in the town of Sausalito. That's crazy. There's so many people that live in the hills that can't grow food. And it would be so healthy for, again, that intergenerational experience of supportive living, since Marin County has such a growing aging population. So I'm curious about, and it also relates in terms of MALT and preserving agricultural land, because we're preserving the agricultural land, which I think is marvelous. But what about taking some of that agricultural land and doing community kinds of projects on that land? So those are my questions.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. The land that we protect is privately owned. So MALT does not have the ability to force our landowners to do anything other than abide by the terms and conditions of the conservation easement. So I think that's a key thing. I hear the same thing regarding young farmers and ranchers who need access to land. MALT fully supports young farmers and ranchers, and we work with our farmers and ranchers, and we have leasing workshops. We have other workshops. We reach out to them and let them know that there are folks who are interested, but we cannot make them do anything other than abide by the terms and conditions of the conservation easement. So taking some MALT protected land and creating a community housing area or something similar to that is beyond our power. So.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a couple thoughts. As it relates to the community gardens, I think actually in some respects there's an exciting situation around community gardens in Marin County. Marin City is building a very significant new community garden right now. They opened a remarkable community garden in the canal last year. San Geronimo Valley's had a community garden for the last several years, and they managed to do it without bureaucracy, so more power to them. You might want to look at that as a village to live in. Novato is moving forward with theirs. So I think community gardens really are an important part of our future. In terms of the housing, I think this is one of the most important things we as a community are going to have to tackle, because it doesn't work right now. And some of it is something under our control, and so we have to have important land use conversations. But I think a big part of it is the root of it is a growing sense of income inequality that is a function of the capitalist system that we're working under. And it makes it extremely difficult in a supply and demand economy where you have so much demand for a limited supply. It's a challenge that was laid out in the 73 plan but has not been adequately addressed by our community today. Dana.
I'm just going to take this out of here. So, I mentioned I was a little conflicted about my conversation today, and this is exactly why. So the elephant in this room is that the conversation around affordable housing is ugly. It's hurtful, it's mean, and it continues to divide people. So this is a county, if I understand this correctly, that had a projection of becoming a center for approximately 400,000 people, and you're half that, right? So it's a bubble, because the rest of the world is growing in population, and Marin will grow too. So the conversation has to begin around density housing. And yes, it looks different than the way Marin has been built, but there are ways to do it to make it inclusive, to have transportation-oriented development, to provide housing for people who work in this county in nonprofits and who teach here and who are our police and firefighters and our service workers. I live on a block in Oakland that is the United Nations. I have neighbors from Yemen, from Cuba, from Vietnam, from China. I got black neighbors, white neighbors. My neighbors have lived on my block, many of them 30 years, renters. I love my block because of that. We all look different. We speak differently, but we want the same things in life. We want our children to grow up and have a better life than we had. We want to be safe in our communities. We want to know our neighbors. We want to grow together. And so what I would encourage Marin to think about moving forward is not how to keep people out, but how can we bring people in and live amongst one another. Thank you.
So, please, and then start moving up a little bit after that. And yes, but
I'm
please.
Gordon from Novato, and when I hear about the math to do carbon trading and credits, pollution credits, I'm very skeptical, and I want to know how and be convinced why it's not going to be doomed to failure like so many of our other initiatives. And I want real reductions in CO2, not just on paper. So can anyone help me understand how it might work?
Well, I'll just say this. I've heard a lot of discussion within the environmental community about cap and trade. And I realize that it's not everyone's favorite policy. A lot of folks are really committed to fee and dividend or other models for putting a price on carbon. But look, here in California, it is real, it is happening, it's been upheld by the courts, and imperfect as it may be, it is one of the most important carbon pricing initiatives underway anywhere in the world. So I support it, and I think we need to build from it. I hope at the federal level and at the international level we can do much, much more. But I think it's very real. I think it is driving innovation and investment. There is trading that is happening right now. It's energizing a clean energy economy. So, the idea that we need to wait for something bigger and better or some huge command and control solution that's going to give us that certainty of emission reductions, let's keep pushing for more. But let's absolutely support the victories that we have that are starting to make a difference.
Thank you. Jamison, do you want to add one aspect to that?
Sure, yeah. I agree with Congressman Huffman. It's an imperfect market, but it is developing, it is evolving. And right now, carbon's being traded for about $15 a ton. We did a feasibility study about 4 years ago that suggested it needed to be closer to about $35 to $40 a ton for it to be economically feasible. We're a ways away from that. However, 2015, the transportation sector now is going to be held accountable to the cap and trade system as well. Up to now, it's been industrial polluters. Now it's going to extend to public transportation sector. And there's a feeling that that's really going to drive more demand and bring that price up. But, we're in the very, very early stages of this thing. Very early, and we've got a ways to go, but it's encouraging that it's growing, it's moving, it's kind of settling down, and I think the future is tremendous. So, and I thank you for your support.
Okay, so yes, right here, and unfortunately, we are running out of time for questions,
Okay,
but
I'll try to
I
talk
can tell you
fast.
that the number of folks whose hands are up and interested indicates to me we need to find another forum to continue this conversation. Thank you.
My name's Linda Herman, and I've lived in West Marin for almost 30 years. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Caitlin.
And my professional particular interest is in senior co-housing. And actually, there was a meeting just before this meeting, a group of people in Marin who are trying to get a co-housing project happening. And as soon as you mention that it's market rate and you need to be prepared to pay XYZ dollars, half the people in the room are like, this isn't a project for me. So I'll get to my question. Ironically, sustainability, that we're talking about density, high density living is like a hallmark of sustainability, but it's such a dirty word in Marin County and many places. So I'm wondering, are the people who are, I don't know if our general plan is up for grabs right now, but the housing element's being rewritten like all over the place. you know, who's brave enough to say, you can put a second unit in your yard, or you know, we want you to, or you can go more than 3 stories. I studied a property in Fairfax, and to get the numbers to work, we needed more than 3 stories, but my God, more than 3 stories in Fairfax, like, no way is that going to happen. So the rules of the game have to change in order to be able to use the land more efficiently that we already, and we're so limited, and I'm not proposing we unprotect the land that's protected, but we have to be able to use property more efficiently than we're already using, and the only way that's going to happen is through laws, through policy, right? So any thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, yeah, thank you. Nona? Nona, would you like to make any comment on that?
None of that.
Not?
No.
No. Okay. Well, that's fine. I understand, but I think that here again, this is the important conversation we need to have as a community. If we want to have our children living here, if we want the people that work nearby to be able to live here, we're going to have to come up with a way to house them. At the same time, we feel strongly about the limits of our transportation systems, the aesthetics of our own community, the character, the sense of self-governance. We have a lot of conversation to have around that. And that's the fundamental conversation I think we have, because it's a big piece of the countywide vision in the 1970s that didn't come to fruition to date. And that is a diverse and healthy community where all of us, 258,000 of us, have opportunity and well-being. We're not there yet, and we're going to need to keep working on it. We're going to need to do it in a way that does understand these larger natural forces, and reminding us again that the Bioneers is where we're having this conversation. They understand that we have to think interrelatedly, that we can't just look at our environmental issues, we have to look at our social justice and our economic opportunities at the same time. And I think that's the discussion that Marin has. We have a great blueprint. I agree with Nona that the plans, corridors still are very effective in ascribing the kind of community we want to be. We need to work at a finer grain within that together. And I heard her call, and I've heard others call for working more collaboratively. That too is a Bioneer principle. I am going to give one last opportunity for any of the panelists to speak, and then we will break, and I will make sure that as many of them stay around for individual conversations as they're willing to. Beginning with Nona, and then Dana, and then
Okay, I
Jamison.
want to pick up on something that Dana said, which is absolutely critical to my looking forward, and that is the urban environment that she enjoys, she loves, the kids that grow up in that environment. What are we going to do for those kids to experience wildness? We have learned that kids are transformed by wildness. We need to create those experiences for them. The state parks, the national parks now, one of their key questions going forward is how are we going to make our parks relevant to kids? So my proposal here is that we need to find ways, the Water District may not be as concerned about that, but the state parks and national parks really are. We need to ask the same question. How are we going to bring our kids to wildness so that they also can have that transformative experience?
Thank you.
Nina and Kenny, would you come forward, please?
Let's welcome them.
Yeah. 25 years is just too big a milestone to be here and to be part of a panel when these folks are going to be here too and not do what I do best, which is to present a congressional record statement. So Kenny and Nina, on behalf of the United States Congress, I want to recognize you for 25 years of incredible environmental leadership, community leadership. The event that you do, that thankfully you have chosen to do here in Marin for the last 25 years, brings us together, helps us all grow and think, and has just contributed so much to these huge challenges we face as a civilization. Thank you for your leadership, and here's to many more years to come.